Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the All in Crypto podcast. I am your host, Rupert, and today I am delighted and excited to be joined once again by Bill Laboon from the Web3 Foundation. Of course, he is the Director of Education and Governance Initiatives over at Web3. So, Bill, how are you? It's been a minute.
Yeah, thank you. It has been a while, but things are going great, both for me and for Polkadot.
So yeah, really looking forward to diving into how things have been going for you personally, and also, of course, Polkadot, which we're predominantly here to talk about. So, Bill, before I start, some people may be new to yourself. Could you perhaps just give us a brief introduction in regards to how you ended up where you are in the cryptocurrency space?
Sure. So I actually have probably the nerdiest story of getting into crypto ever. I was doing research on hash algorithms, and someone said, "Did you know that there's a money, internet money that you can make using hash algorithms?" And I said, "That doesn't make any sense. What are you talking about?" And so someone showed me the Bitcoin white paper relatively early on, and I looked at it and said that was interesting, but then set it aside for a few years. Then in 2012, got back into it, really started diving into things with Ethereum once I saw truly programmable money out there. Gave, as far as I know, the first talk on Ethereum in Pittsburgh. I was a teacher. I taught computer science at the University of Pittsburgh at the time, taught also the first university level course in blockchain technology, as far as I know, in Pittsburgh. But wanted to dive further in. So I left academia, came to work at Web3 Foundation here in Zug, Switzerland. And that was in 2019, a little before Kusama, our Canary network, launched. And Polkadot then launched a bit later. And have been there ever since. And so been working for the last more than 6 years in the Polkadot ecosystem and helping it to grow and really watching it change over time.
And it has done quite a bit of changing, and I do want to get into all of that. And we were talking a little bit off camera about how Polkadot's perhaps differed today from the original white paper and vision that was kind of set out for it. And I remember listening to Gav actually talk about that specifically and kind of taking, I think, a very grown-up approach and saying, look, when you design something initially, the world that you end up in may be a different one from when you initially designed something. And it's good to kind of be nimble and, I guess, keep up to date. And Polkadot's certainly done that. And I definitely want to get into some of that. So more broadly, there's some people that might be not familiar with yourself, but there also might be people that are not familiar with Polkadot. There's thousands of cryptocurrencies out there right now. Maybe you could just give us a high sort of overview, a high level overview of Polkadot and what it is.
Sure. So the original idea of Polkadot was that it would not be actually a blockchain. It would be an entire set of blockchains. And so if you're familiar with how Ethereum and its L2s work, you can think of the original version of Polkadot as this built in a decentralized way. So we have our own rollups, which are called parachains, that are actually much more secure than a traditional Ethereum L2 rollup and much more efficient because we sort of plan from the beginning, this would be how things work. That, very little would be done on what we call the relay chain, the central chain of the system, and everything would be pushed out to what we call these parachains, which are rollups. So we have 43 of these running on Polkadot right now. However, we're in the process actually of evolving a bit. So one of the many ways that we're evolving into what we're calling hub and cloud. So you can still, if you need a blockchain, you need all the benefits of a blockchain, you will be able to create a blockchain using the Polkadot SDK, which, again, lots of parachain projects, Polkadot projects are doing. Lots of other teams actually in other ecosystems use the Polkadot SDK. They don't always advertise it, but the Polkadot SDK is very powerful if you're looking to make a blockchain either on Polkadot or elsewhere. But also adding the ability for essentially smart contracts on Polkadot. So you can have some Solidity smart contracts, run that. If you then need to migrate to a chain later on, you need the capabilities or you need more flexibility in various ways, then you can do that. So essentially what we've evolved towards is letting all kinds of developers build on Polkadot. So instead of saying, well, you need to have a chain or decide which chain that you want to use, we're allowing you to do both sort of a traditional smart contract or very easily then moving that code and that functionality to its own chain.
Let's break that down I think, in a little bit more detail, because the last time we spoke, Polkadot was, and I've always sort of applauded Polkadot for this model. I think it's the right one in the sense that actually you've been validated by many other blockchain projects out there. You know, the kind of initial vision, I guess, for blockchain was to kind of solve everything on the one layer. And now what we see with Ethereum, for example, with all the layer twos, or other ecosystems with things like subnets, partner chains, whatever it may be, is this move away from a one chain to do everything. And if you think about the application of a distributed ledger, that would kind of be impossible. One chain not doing everything, but actually having a sort of parachain comes from the idea of parallel kind of chains running at once. This kind of parallel system where you actually have multiple chains. How many parachains was it that Polkadot has right now?
43.
43. So you actually have Polkadot's model last time we spoke was a relay chain, and then you have parachains on top, which are their own specific chains. They can be fit for whatever purpose. But they ultimately all rely on the relay chain, which gives things like interoperability, so on and so forth. So that was the vision the last time we spoke, or that was where Polkadot was at. And then we were moving towards what you just spoke about, which is more of a kind of pay-as-you-go core time model. Where are we at right now? So has Polkadot gone from the kind of parachain where you had to win a slot auction? Where's Polkadot today? Have we moved away from parachains? Let's maybe break that down in a little bit more detail, because Polkadot can be quite a confusing ecosystem. For sure.
Yeah.
There's a lot to it.
Unfortunately. It really is complicated in some ways. But I think, I think anytime you're trying to push the boundaries, right, it's going to be very complicated. And we've actually done a lot to help improve the user experience. They don't work, the end user doesn't worry so much about this. So as you mentioned earlier, parachains had to you had to win a slot auction. So every week, essentially, there would be an auction. Who wants to lock up the most DOT in order to get a slot? We did see some problems with that, because if you are looking to build a chain and launch at a specific date, you want to know, okay, right? I want to have my marketing ready for here. I want to have my admins ready. You want to have a specific time that you will get a slot, that you will be able to start producing blocks. And so, we moved away as part of our transition to what we're calling Polkadot 2.0. So we moved away from auctions. Those no longer exist. But rather, you can either pay on a 1 month basis, as you pay a certain amount for DOT, it's an auction process, or you can even actually pay per block. So if you say, look, I'm not producing a lot of blocks now, I just want to, maybe I'm just doing it very rarely, like once per day I need to make a block, or I'm still testing, I want to make sure things work before I scale up, or I only want to produce a block when I have a transaction, whatever, you can actually pay on a per block basis also. So this is just one part of Polkadot 2.0. So auctions are totally gone in terms of getting a slot, but now you do have smaller auctions for getting block space or for buying on a per month basis. But that, okay, it's going to be at this point is when it's going to start. There's other parts of this. The second part of Polkadot 2.0 is something we call async backing, which all that means is essentially faster block times. So it's now 6-second block times by default. So if you're looking to build a roll up on Polkadot, you by default have 6-second block times. The final part, which actually it should be going live at any time now, it's already live on Kusama, our Canary network, is elastic scaling, which is essentially using more cores, using more of the processing power of the relay chain, buying more of it, so that you can either have larger blocks or produce blocks more frequently. So we've actually been able to get this down to almost 500 millisecond blocks if you're willing to buy more computing power. You can really think of it like Amazon Cloud, right? If you want to do host a, we were talking about websites. If you want to host a very simple website, you may not need a lot of computing power. You buy a very cheap instance on AWS. But if you want to run something really big with lots of things happening and lots of interaction, lots of transactions, et cetera, you actually can buy many cores, as we call them, many CPUs, much computing power, and then you actually can then scale up how fast you can produce blocks. So, like I said, we've seen that on test nets, we can get this down to a little bit over 500 milliseconds. And, that's obviously it's a test net. And so it's never 100% realistic, but we try to make these test nets like relatively realistic and like what you would see in the real world. So we think that we'll have like similar block times eventually.
It's pretty amazing, and I want to sort of explore and get into the components that you just mentioned there of Polkadot 2.0. But again, one thing that I've always kind of given Polkadot a lot of credit for is being early in regards to its design and how you haven't just got one chain doing everything. It's kind of this parallelized system where you can tackle whatever use case it is that you need to. And I really love the fact that Polkadot moved away from quite a rigid model of you need to win a slot auction to be able to deploy on Polkadot to now more of a kind of inclusive, friendlier model. And actually, those parachains have really kind of been, or perhaps they always were, used and utilized as cores in a computer. If you think about Polkadot as a supercomputer and you have your CPUs and these kind of things within a computer, Polkadot effectively has 43 cores within its supercomputer, and people can pay to use those to facilitate whatever application it is in a very flexible manner, which I think is, in my opinion, was the right direction for Polkadot to go. So is that the real change that we've seen here? These parachains have now been broken up in some cases or been offered in a marketplace instead of a kind of auction model. And how has that been going? Have we seen much uptick? What happened to the chains that were already existing? Talk us through that transition and kind of where we are right now.
Yeah. So really, there's two questions there, right? That I think are very different. So one, yes, all of the old parachains, since they had 2-year leases that they won auctions for, they essentially bought enough computing resources. We just translated that into free resources, right? Like you can think of it as like coupons for continuing to stay on the chain going forward. So we have seen actually some new. We have seen quite a few new projects that are like taking advantage of these Polkadot 2.0 capabilities. So I would say first is Mythical, which has been the number one NFT platform right now in the world in terms of volume. They're actually a gaming chain. They've got NFL Rivals and FIFA Rivals. There's the Pudgy Penguins game is coming to them. So yeah, they're their own parachain, but they are one of the big reasons for this elastic scaling, so that we can support more and more of what they're doing. And this really wouldn't be possible in other chains where you can just very it's just like buying more space on EC2 or something, but you're buying more. Hey, I've got this amount of computing power. Now I want some more computing power, and you just sort of like adjust the knob and pay a little bit more, and then you have more computing power. And so this has been very valuable for a couple of teams. So Mythical is a big one. Accurast, which lets you use your phone essentially to rent out computing power for people. Because it turns out that for certain computational problems, phones are extremely efficient, much more efficient than using some server in a data farm somewhere. And so this is another thing, right, where it's very useful to be able to use these capabilities of Polkadot 2.0. They've been able to build the surrounding infrastructure for it, et cetera, and use these features to as their needs change, like they're able to modify it. So that said, we're actually seeing some like really interesting stuff happening in terms of core time on Polkadot. So we actually, one of the more interesting things I think that's happened recently is someone has bought up all of the extra cores and is now selling them. So we actually have like a market, like actually appearing on chain, that people are seeing this what we call core time resources. So again, think of core time. When I say that, think of it as like a coupon for a month's worth of computation on Polkadot, right? Your chain can use it. And someone bought up all of the extra coupons, and now they're selling them on a secondary in a secondary market. So we're really seeing like this becoming a its own sort of like system, right? Just like we're seeing additional markets opening up, additional economics happening as people determine the worth of this core time. And I think it's a really interesting experiment. One of the things that has always been very exciting to me about Polkadot is that it's trying new things. It's seeing a lot of the problems that other chains, are just starting to see, they start to see a few years later, just like, we've always had a very open governance system. And now we see with other chains moving to governance systems, and they're seeing problems that we hit into a few years ago. So similarly, right, as we're figuring out, like, our economic, we have this marketplace opening up, and then you look at it in comparison to Ethereum, for instance, with its blob time, with its blob sales, right? And like, all right, well, how do you have like a marketplace for those, because they're so cheap right now? And so it's really interesting to see, like, Polkadot sort of experimenting with this stuff, finding solutions, finding other problems, as we continue to move forward.
Yeah, it's uncharted territory, and that's one thing I've always really liked about Polkadot myself. Is it kind of presses the boundaries of economics, social interactions, governance, which I'm sure we're going to get into, because I mean, I've been a partaker in OpenGov, I've been a voter in OpenGov. It's been a thrilling experience, and I know it got a lot of criticism initially, but I think it's been a huge success as an overall. And it's been amazing to watch so many different people come together and form coalitions, form oppositions. It's really been an exciting experience, and I do want to talk about that. One thing I think a lot of people will want to know is, when you purchase time on Polkadot, and I think that's a good way of putting it, how does that work? Can you pay in USDC? Do you need to pay in Polkadot? And then what happens with that Polkadot that's accrued? Is that burn, or is there a mechanism that goes into that?
Yeah, so it's only with DOT. So DOT is the only way that you can purchase core time. So there's two ways. One is this monthly auction where you buy an NFT. And this NFT is good for 1 month, right? Like I said, you can think of this NFT as a coupon, and you can say, okay, I'm going to use this. You can then give it to somebody else as well, right? So if you buy, so I said this is why we have someone who bought all these extra coupons, and then they're selling it to new people, and we have a bit of a market starting there, like a real market. All of the DOT used in this way is burned, so that you have to pay DOT for this, and then it's burned whenever it's purchased. The second thing you can do is there are more cores than just 43. There's and I forget the exact number, but I think there's 80. We could push it more, but we've set a specific number. I want to say 80, but please don't quote me on that. So there's two things, right? You can buy more of these cores to speed up your own chain, to have it reduce in time, essentially, or have bigger blocks, whichever you want. The second thing you can do is buy on a per block basis, and it's a relatively small amount. It's something like 0.05 DOT. Again, it's burned to have one block confirmed by the chain. So if you have something, a blockchain that's going to be producing blocks all the time, it usually makes sense to get 1 month of what we call bulk core time. The last one sold for 90 DOT a piece, about 3 weeks ago or so. So 90 DOT for a month worth of core time for one core. But you also could do this on on a per block basis.
I think one thing that is certainly very interesting is to see how this all evolves in the future. I mean, you mentioned people kind of setting up secondary marketplaces for core time and bulk purchasing, and I think that's very interesting to see how that evolves. In regards to Polkadot right now, what are some of the things that you see and you think, wow, like there's got to be builders on Polkadot. There's a lot of amazing projects on Polkadot. We've interviewed quite a few of them, but what is kind of catching your attention right now in regards to what's being built? Are there any kind of, and I don't, might be quite a hard question to ask because you don't want to maybe favorite projects or things like this. Of course, that's understandable. But when it comes to Polkadot and its ecosystem, what are some of the things that you're looking at right now and going, wow, this could be huge? I mean, not just take away from what Polkadot's doing as a whole and how monumental that is, but specifically in regards to the ecosystem and some of the things you're seeing coming through.
Yeah, so I would say, like, specifically in terms of like projects being built on Polkadot, hydration is a sort of a super DEX, super DeFi system. right now that does all sorts of really cool things, and it's all on its own chain. So that means that it's again, you don't have a lot of interruptions and interactions from other chains interfering with it. It's not like Ethereum, when the network gets clogged up, things suddenly get really slow. One of the cool things that is possible with Polkadot is actually through hydration, we pay the Polkadot Technical Fellowship in stable coins. So Polkadot has a treasury, so we can discuss more about this with OpenGov. It's about $150 million US worth of assets right now. But the majority of it is in DOT. And people, they want, stable coins for their salary. So we've actually set up, a multi-chain system, through hydration that trustlessly every day swaps a little bit of DOT for USDT and USDC, and then automatically pays members of the Polkadot Technical Fellowship. So basically the main developers of the network, and there's an on-chain fellowship, sort of like a super DAO, we call it collective, that are paid their salaries through the chain. And to me, this has always seemed like really amazing, right? Like that hydration has really been able to do this in a trustless way. We've got a 3-chain hop, from the relay chain to hydration to what we call the asset hub, one of our system parachains for storing assets, that are interacting in a way to automatically make sure that salaries get paid. So it's just one of the cool things that hydration is doing. They're really great system. So another team I've already mentioned was Accurast. So they've been running their testnet on Kusama for quite a while, and I believe they'll be going on to Polkadot in the very near future, which I've also find very interesting because it's interacting with hardware and doing it in a trustless way. This is something that'd be very difficult to do with a smart contract. Difficult if not impossible, right? Just through EVM. But because of the way Polkadot SDK really lets you create a blockchain from the ground up, make feature. It's like if you're a programmer, like programming in C, where you have like a lot more like flexibility in what you could do, versus like smart contract could be something like Python, where you're dealing with stuff at a very high level. You can't make like really like small changes to things and have like really fine-grained control. And so Accurast is something like I've been very excited about. Mythical is always pushing the boundaries of what you can do on Polkadot because they have so many transactions. We found it like they're really, for us, a really great way of ensuring, we're staying like at the forefront of technology. So I think of it as like video games, right? When you look at like computers, I will say I'm pretty old, so I remember wanting to get a 486DX instead of an SX because I'd be able to run Doom better, right? Like it's in technology, we always want to have better, faster, more efficient, and video games often really like push this, and I think like blockchain's no exception.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, Accurast is certainly an interesting one. I know I've spoken to a few people, including Accurast, about this. But if you can crack how to kind of correlate mobile phones in this case, and you could get, I can't remember what the figure was. I think it might have been if you had 100 million iPhones that you could connect to a network, you could run an extremely capable large language model and a kind of AI system that you could. I mean, this stuff is. It's unbelievable. And like you say, mobile phones actually specifically fit in very well due to the silicon chips in regards to some of the use cases that may want to be facilitated. And all these things are happening on, I mean, Polkadot as an ecosystem, I think gets really underlooked because not only has it got an unbelievable ecosystem, it has all the benefits that Polkadot's core time now really gives you in terms of flexibility, in terms of capabilities. And I think one thing that people always like to do when it comes to different cryptocurrency projects is compare them. And it can be quite hard to compare Polkadot to the rest of the crypto space because it's simply different. But if you were to compare it, I mean, Polkadot's capabilities due to its design are pretty insane, right? I don't know if you could maybe go over some of them. I mean, if you were to say, like, for example, some people talk about TPS. Polkadot's TPS can be quite hard to work out because it varies. It's high. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that because people love to compare. If you compare Polkadot, you'll find actually it's uncomparable in some ways, but far superior in many,
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is like always traditionally been a problem with Polkadot is you can't just say, if I were to like explain, most people are familiar with, for instance, Bitcoin. Let's say and they say, okay, well, what's Ethereum? It's like, well, it's Bitcoin, but it's programmable. It's like, well, what's Solana? It's like, well, it's like Ethereum, but it's faster. Polkadot really is like it's hard to say what it is in one word like that, or just a few words. So I do think like what's really, I'd say there's a couple of things that differentiate Polkadot from other chains out there in the chain ecosystems. There actually is like quite a big community in Polkadot, but I do feel like traditionally it's been sort of on its own, right? That because most other networks, like blockchains, are using Solidity, right? Like it's sort of traditional. They're using EVM. They're EVM compatible. Polkadot has had EVM compatible chains running on it, but because Polkadot sort of itself is operating at a bit of a lower level, you, there were traditionally like no Solidity contracts on Polkadot. So that actually is changing. As I said, people have asked. That's something that we've seen that developers want, is that many times they don't want to build a chain. They don't think it's necessary to build a chain because it's more difficult to build a chain than a smart contract. Smart contracts are difficult. Chains are even more difficult. You really need to make sure that you've programmed things very correctly. The safety rails just aren't there like they are in smart contracts. And not that there are a lot of safety rails and smart contracts, but at least you won't go into an infinite loop. Eventually, you'll run out of gas. But if you're writing your own chain, like that's okay. You could get stuck in an infinite loop, and then all right, your chain doesn't go anywhere, right? You've got to hard fork or something to get out of it. So we've really tried to listen to developers to get them to understand like what Polkadot is. And the way I see it is like no matter what you want to build on Polkadot, there is a way to do it, right? So we have at one end you have lots of different parachains, these rollups that I've already mentioned that you can just use or build a smart contract on top of. Then native smart contracts are coming soon. If you need a chain, you then can very easily migrate over. Like you start with a smart contract, then you move to a chain. If you have need of using your own chain, so think of it as like having a smart contract, but you very easily can convert it into an L2 on Ethereum. But you don't have to start with that. Then if you really need something very different, you actually can use the Polkadot SDK to create entirely its own chain outside of the Polkadot ecosystem. All of that, then you worry about things like security. You have to worry much more on your own. It's generally, I think, a lot easier and you're more efficient in the long run to just say I'm going to connect to Polkadot. So what's the benefit then of connecting to Polkadot? One is you have the economic security of Polkadot, which is several $billion of staked DOT right now. You have it's automatically decentralized. You don't need sequencers, right? There's no centralized sequencers in Polkadot. It's all decentralized. You have the ability to increase how much computing power you want to use, which means that essentially you can adjust how big your blocks are or how fast they are. So right now, on Kusama, you can do that down to 2 seconds, but we have on testnets 500 milliseconds. So hopefully that will be, as we figure out but as we get the last like bits ironed out of getting that to work on the real networks, then it should go down even further. But I think the final thing that's most important about Polkadot is how easy interoperability is. So all of the different chains in Polkadot are operating under the same consensus, which means they can interact without bridges. Generally, bridges are a weak point traditionally. You see a lot of huge bridge hacks. It's very easy to hack a bridge. I mean, I think of it as just like in the military, right? If you're looking at if you're playing like a war games or something, right? Bridges are always very weak because, right, everything can go there, everything has to cross in a very small area, and if either side falls, that bridge is useless, right? So you got a lot to worry about. Polkadot, everything operates under the same consensus, so you very quickly can send assets from one chain to another. So if you have an asset on rollup A and you want to send it to rollup B, on Ethereum, this means, okay, you first go to Ethereum. This is an optimistic rollup. Then you wait for 7 days. If it's a ZK, you might wait for a few hours. Whereas with Polkadot, the next block, If you have an asset here, the next block it's over here, right? So 6 seconds, 12 seconds later, okay, you've just moved that. The second thing with interoperability with Polkadot that I think is so powerful is that it's not just moving assets. It's not like, okay, I have a token or an NFT, but if you have a smart contract here and a smart contract here on chain A and chain B, the one on chain A can actually call the smart contract on chain B and get the result. Right? So you actually can do things like automatically paying the salaries of the technical fellowship, right? The multi-chain hop. You're doing things across multiple chains. You're able to not just like parallelize things, but actually have those all like interoperate and work with each other. So if there's some feature from some other chain that you want, you actually can call out to that chain and use it. And so this is awesome, right? You have like all these different chains, and they're not silos. They're all interacting with each other and very easily interacting with each other. And you had mentioned scalability, and like transactions per second (TPS) is always a very difficult thing. What do we mean by transaction? Is it just a transfer of funds? Is it a transfer of funds to an account that doesn't have anything in it, or one that does? And it's very hard to measure. But we made what we call a standard transaction, which is sending a token on a chain from one account to another. And this is what we're defining as a standard transaction, a native token moving from one account to another. And on Kusama, which is our Canary network, we had up to 143,000 transactions per second. So
Wow.
this is orders of magnitude beyond pretty much anything else out there. So we actually saw problems. The chain itself handled everything okay. Actually, like things like block explorers actually had trouble keeping up with so many transactions on the network. But I think it goes to show the power of this scaling model of saying that we are not going to have every single validator, every single block producer validate everything happening on the ecosystem. But we actually, and I'm happy to explain the ELS protocol if you want to go into it, we're actually able to prove that to a very, very high degree that everything is correct, even without actually checking, having every single validator check everything. So this enables this this really high scalability. And something I want to mention actually with this what we call the spamming. So you can look up, or maybe I can send you a link to the spamming event. 143,000 transactions per second, but only using 23% of the available cores. So we actually had a lot more cores available to use on Polkadot, on Kusama, but we started with this. But even then, we had some just absolutely massive numbers due to sort of the decisions made on how to scale the network.
I mean, Polkadot, whichever way you look at it, is very impressive. It's complex, but in that complexity, there's real thought being put into it. It's not just complex for the sake of being so. It's complex because there's been a lot of problems that have been solved or tried to have been solved. And I think when you look at it as an overall package, for example, if you're a developer, there's 1,000,001 reasons why you might want to build on Polkadot. First of all, you mentioned about utilizing that security that comes inherent with Polkadot and its validator set. I mean, you have billions of dollars securing your chain just through grace of building on Polkadot. You have that interoperability aspect. So you might be a chain that wants to leverage DeFi or wants to get access to computing resources, whatever it may be. I think when you look at Polkadot's ecosystem, it becomes more and more of a strength due to that interoperability. And it only takes, and I still think the crypto space is in kind of an infancy, a few killer applications to bring on tens, hundreds, potentially billions of people, whether that's in identity on chain, whether that's in finance on whatever it may be. And what you've got is this just supercharged ecosystem that is actually able to handle the kind of velocity needed in some of these applications. Like gaming, for example, is very heavy in regards to transactions per second or throughput. Polkadot's model really to me, it just seems to be the right one. And I think when we talk about cores, you mentioned we can get up to 80 cores perhaps on Polkadot. Right now, there's 43 of them. There is a future where there's hundreds, if not thousands, or am I misspeaking here? We're down the line, but is this something you could envision? Of course, the need needs to be there right now. Right now, we're optimizing where to put the resources and how to manage that. But there is a future where Polkadot can scale due to its model almost infinitely, right? And then it becomes a computer
Yeah.
science problem.
Yeah, and so actually, this has been something we've been thinking about actually, from the very beginning. So the first idea, if you think of Polkadot, right now, again, we could scale probably very easily to 300 cores. It's basically one third the number of validators, so around 300 is our final what we think we could do without major architectural changes. There was also talk of having essentially this relay chain that has parachains connected to it, but you may have like secondary parachains connected to these, right? So like we call them hierarchical relay chains. However, right now, actually, there's an even newer idea that Gavin Wood has been working on called JAM, the Joint Accumulate Machine, which essentially, if we think of Polkadot as a layer zero, right? Because like you then have these L1 blockchains that are built on top of it. You can almost think of JAM as an L negative one, that instead of being optimized specifically for chains, it lets you run any computation in a decentralized manner. And then this could be, Polkadot. There's going to be like a parachain service on Jam, and that would just be one thing that it could handle. So actually, Gavin Wood very famously recently did Doom on chain on Jam. So there was no human interaction. He was basically just running the demo. But what I thought was really cool about this was just like people run Doom on whatever, like an old LED watch or medical device or whatever. The point is that just compiling Doom, you can then run it, right? They didn't rewrite Doom in Solidity, right? They were able to actually compile Doom and get it to run on Jam. So the idea here is that like blockchains will be able to run on Jam, like Polkadot will be a part of it. It turns out it's much more efficient. We're not exactly sure how, because the first test nets are still being developed. Like these are very early days, but we're talking again like orders of magnitude more scaling while not sacrificing decentralization using Jam. And so one thing we could do obviously is just like keep scaling cores, and maybe we'll see that with Polkadot. But I do in the next few years, I think you're going to see like this sort of this other approach, Jam, which again is part of Polkadot has always been made to be like as we discover new technologies. We have lots of researchers at Web3 Foundation that are looking into this stuff. As we discover new things, Polkadot is flexible enough to pivot, while still enabling like all the code that's run, it's going to run the same as it ever has. But we're even going to move past like this, just focusing on the number of cores. We'll be able to have all kinds of any kind of code that you want to run, running on Jam as part of Polkadot, as well as interacting with each other. So right now, I said that like Parachain A can call a smart contract here can call a smart contract on another chain. But you still need to know, okay, there is another chain here, right? You still need to do what's called asynchronous programming. It's a slightly different style of programming than synchronous. So the idea with Jam, it's sort of semi-synchronous, where it would be very easy even easier for developers to do this. And that Jam would handle all of the making sure if you're trying to call a function that's on a different chain, it will handle that for you. So it'll be able to scale and remove even more of the roadblocks and the little like stumbling blocks of having to have this cross-chain interaction. Jam will handle all of that for you. So I think I'm really looking forward to seeing this and what can get built on that compared to what can get built right now.
It's pretty remarkable when you look at Polkadot as an overall sort of package. It's just got everything. I mean, there's definitely some things that can be improved and worked on, but it's a pioneer in regards to the blockchain space. It truly is. I mean, it's been the first in many things. I'm sure it's going to be the first in many more things. It's got the furthest with certain protocols and ways of conducting things. I mean, it truly is just an impressive project. We've got nothing but love for Polkadot. And I think one trend that I'm really seeing is the embracing of distributed ledger technology by the traditional financial sector. Now, this is, I think, one of the big narratives when it comes to crypto, certainly immediately. We see the Genius Act initially get through the first stage to be voted on, which is all about stablecoins and the facilitation of stablecoins, which Scott Bessent, David Sachs, the crypto czar, interesting name that. They've all very much put forward the idea that stablecoins are going to be the evolution of money and embraced by the US government, the institutions within it, and the central banks. Surely Polkadot as an ecosystem has looked at the trend as it relates to traditional finance, whether it's stablecoins and the evolution of money or real world assets, and thought we need to get a piece of that pie. Could we maybe talk about how you've seen strategies, if there are some, or thinking towards that evolve? Because I think this is a major use case for distributed ledger technology. It would seem a shame for Polkadot, being as impressive as it is as a technology, to miss out on that.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely very aware of that, and it is something that is a priority. Stablecoin transfers, using the Asset Hub, because it is so easy, where you have like so much capability. Transactions are very cheap. So one thing I didn't mention, during this spamming, when we had 143,000 transactions per second, we didn't even get to the point of transaction prices starting to rebalance and go higher. So transactions stayed exactly as cheap as they ever were, which I found really, really interesting. So stablecoin transfers are a fraction of a cent on Asset Hub, on one of our rollups, one of our parachains, and you can do 1,000 of them per second and not even be concerned. As another cool thing, I think that it's very useful for us, and you don't see a lot of on most networks, is the ability to pay for stablecoin transfers with stablecoins. So if I have some USDT on Ethereum, I also need some ETH, right, to do a transfer. I need to pay the gas fee in ETH. Whereas with USDT transfer on Polkadot, just behind the scenes, it gets, the user doesn't worry about it. They send and then they pay whatever, 1/10 of a cent of USDT as for the transaction fee. So we've really made sure to make sure that stable coins are available. We have USDT and USDC, as well as some other stable coins that have appeared in the ecosystem, like native USDT and USDC on Polkadot, made it very cheap to transfer them. We are working on the Polkadot app, the Polkadot Pay app, which lets you pay for things using your DOT or using stable coins on DOT. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, I was in Buenos Aires recently. I was there for the Crecimiento and Merge conferences. And I was actually with some of the people from Hydration. And they were able, first off, Buenos Aires, very interesting for crypto. They had a lot of inflation. And so, stable coins are actually very important. And people often use Tron or Ethereum to trade, to store value, right? And then they convert it back into pesos whenever they need it, instead of keeping it in pesos, which is rapidly losing value. It's not as inflationary as it used to be, but still quite inflationary. And so you have people on the streets, right? That are you go and you use stable coins, like, just as to compare. I paid less than $1 worth of like slippage, essentially, to get $50 from someone, from one of these like little exchanges. But if I went to the bank, again, just to compare, I knew I was getting ripped off. And it was $13 in total fees, to get
Wow.
$50 worth of pesos. So, and then we actually, so I was there with these Hydration people, and they said, well, we can do that even cheaper, right? And that means even more profit for the money handlers, right? So we were actually able to convert a few people, already there. So this is definitely something. So there are now a few. There are a few places now in Buenos Aires where if you have USDT or USDC on DOT, you can get it exchanged very cheaply for Argentinian pesos. So this is one of the things that I think is like what we've really been trying to do, is figuring out where are there real problems, right? What is a difficulty, right? And what can Polkadot do to help with it? And like stable coins is one thing. People want native USDT and USDC. All right, we made sure those are both on Asset Hub and Polkadot and available. People want cheap transfers. They don't want the complexity of having to worry about multiple tokens. And so we've really tried to make it as easy and cheap as possible to use stablecoins on Polkadot.
The reason that I really ask is just because I do see, I mean, we speak to a lot of institutions and they're all sort of setting their faces towards distributed ledger technology, because certainly when it comes to value, you're seeing a similar thing take place for value in regards to what took place with information with the kind of internet web 2. Value is now becoming a lot easier to transfer globally. You don't have that $13, you have fractions of cent. I think like I say, when I look at Polkadot as a package, with its capabilities, with its programmability, it's developer friendly, and there's multiple aspects of it being developer friendly. It makes all the sense in the world for the evolution of money and finance to actually take place, or a good chunk of it, on Polkadot. Not to mention the benefits that it might gain from interoperability with DeFi protocols. And I would love to see Polkadot really focus not entirely on that, but certainly a lot, because I do think it's one of the big trends and one of the immediate trends. But then again, to Polkadot's credit, it's always had just an amazing ecosystem. And I've always said this, when you look at ecosystems, Polkadot is really, I think, head and shoulders above many. I mean, talk about DeFi and the suite there. Talk about Deepin. Talk about, identity, like what Kilt are doing and others. It's got everything. And I think that kind of institutional, or those institutional use cases, really bring adoption at a great scale. And you talk about real world assets, you talk about these kind of things. I'd really like to see Polkadot and its capabilities get unlocked, because it can solve real issues. And I think there's great business models that come on the back end of that. Let's talk a little bit about OpenGov. Now, OpenGov has been a roller coaster, I think, for anybody taking part or even watching. It's been fun. It's been an experiment that I think broadly has been a success. Maybe we can just get a quick introduction into OpenGov and then where it's at and what you're seeing with it. Because this is groundbreaking stuff when it comes to distributed ledger, and actually enabling an on-chain government.
Yeah, I mean, so I think OpenGov is just fascinating. So governance has always been something very important for Polkadot. Actually, the very first talk I gave as an employee of Web3 Foundation, the second talk. The first talk I gave was about the Polkadot SDK, but the second talk was about governance and what would governance be like on Kusama, and so, which launched a bit before Polkadot. So the idea is that all decisions on Polkadot are handled by the dot holders and decided by the dot holders. So changing the number of validators, updating the runtime. We don't have hard forks. We actually have a runtime embedded in the chain itself, the code embedded in the chain itself. So, but only dot holders can vote to make that happen. And we've actually had in the past, people vote against it. They decide like, hey, you're upgrading too fast or whatever. But I think the idea is like, the dot holders make the final decision of any change to the network. And one of the parts of that is the Polkadot treasury. So the treasury gets like small amounts, essentially every era, every day. A little bit of DOT goes into the treasury. There are other assets in the treasury from some stable coins, like we mentioned earlier. There are some tokens that were given to the treasury for one reason or another, or traded. So we have some myth tokens, we have some dead tokens, we have other various meme coins people have sent to the treasury. And so with OpenGov, actually, you can also decide who gets these tokens. What are you going to use them for? So we have things like various infrastructure projects, liquidity incentivization programs, marketing programs, events. We've had over 1,550 referenda in total on Polkadot. I don't know the exact number of those which were specifically treasury proposals, but I do know we've given out something like $450 million throughout the history of the program for various projects. And it's gotten very, very, very organized. We have Alice and Bob. It's a team. They make every 6 months they have a treasury report. They talk about like what projects they've been focusing on. There are certain bounties with curators. So these are essentially like small pots of funds with a multi-sig in charge for specific kinds of projects. So there's an infrastructure bounty, there's an events bounty, there's a marketing bounty, and so then you have like experts in this field who can make decisions and decide, right, what does Polkadot need in terms of marketing? What does Polkadot need in terms of events? And it's up to the dot holders to decide, not, okay, should we go to this event or this event or this event, and this person should be in charge and this person should be in charge. We say, look, here we will vote. We agree these people are good curators, as we call them, of the bounty, and we will give this bounty whatever, like 1 million dot for 1 year's of operating expenses. And then, so just like we're sort of sharding transactions along the different rollups, we're sharding the responsibility, right, to different groups. But the final decision is always in the hands of the dot holders.
And what has your experience been? I mean, we've been a partaker in OpenGov. We had a successful referendum, and then one that was very close. And I actually found that experience a lot more kind of entrenching than I thought it was going to be. It was exciting to say the least. It was interesting to see feedback. And I think it was one of the first times that, or it was the first time where I'd kind of seen on-chain governance really take place in quite a wonderful manner. I mean, there's been quite a bit of pushback on it. Nirvana's not for this world. I don't know what the perfect governance system is, if there is one. Yeah, but this is close, right?
Well, I mean, there's actually I was a political science major, actually, as an undergraduate. This is a very, very famous theorem in political science, Arrow's impossibility theorem, which essentially proves there is no such thing as a perfect governance system.
Yeah.
No matter what you do, like it's always trade-offs, right? There's drawbacks and advantages to everything. He was actually able to mathematically prove this, which I think is super interesting. So if you're interested, Arrow's impossibility theorem. And so OpenGov certainly is not perfect, because that's an impossibility in this world. And what I always find interesting is there are obviously things that I disagree with, that you would disagree with, right? Everyone, there's going to be disagreements. But that said, we actually have had and there's going to be scams. There's going to be people that don't. Maybe it's not a scam, but they simply they say they're going to do X and they can't do it for one reason or another, or they weren't successful. But actually, it's been a relatively small percentage. So more than 95% of referenda of treasury proposals have actually done. They've gone out and done what they said they were going to do. There's actually a relatively small percentage. That said, there are things that we could be doing better, and we're actually OpenGov is evolving, and one thing is moving more funds into the treasury. More funds into bounties instead of directly from the treasury, having sharding this even more. We have decentralized voices from Web3 Foundation, where we delegated some voting power from Web3 Foundation DOT to different DAOs in the ecosystem, which has been really interesting because they're actually paid. Web3 Foundation also pays them in DOT, but in return, they have to provide feedback to people. They can't just vote aye or nay. They actually have to give feedback and say, all right, this is why we're voting, and here's what you could do to change it, or maybe you want to do this in the future. So we're actually seeing a very sophisticated governance mechanism show up between these various DAOs, these decentralized voices. We have AAG, Attempts at Governance, which is a twice weekly show that's all about referenda on chain. That gets often dozens of people are involved in these shows, like people that have referenda coming or that have a thought on some referenda and want to talk about it. So even though there are drawbacks, and I think sometimes there's a lot of very high emotions with this, I actually think in some ways that's a good thing. Democracy can sometimes be messy, and if not messy, it's definitely passionate. And the worst thing I think would just be if nobody cared, and that's definitely not the case. People really care about Polkadot. They care about the treasury. They care about where this dot is going and other funds are going. They care about the success of the network. And people are actually stepping up and volunteering and making sure that the network works and doing it in a decentralized way. And again, these decisions, they're not, hey, we're making a decision, then we're asking Web3 Foundation to do it. It's no, you are voting on a little bit of code that will do something that will, give this, it self executes. And so, we're really seeing some major experiments here in self determination and of a decentralized network. And again, yes, there are things that could be better. No, not everyone is Socrates and Plato discussing things, right? Sometimes it's not like that, but we are seeing some real decisions being made with that really well thought out. People care about it. It's not just people just randomly clicking for one reason or another. Lots of discussion. There's a lot of sophistication behind it. So I've been very optimistic about OpenGov as we go forward. And as you mentioned, just technically how Polkadot, we see things that are problematic and we evolve and fix them. I think it's the same thing in OpenGov. We're seeing things that don't work or are problematic. They're actually just recently an article came out about those North Korean hackers that were going for Kraken. They also apparently had tried to do a Polkadot referendum, and it failed with I think less than 1% in favor because of how much work we had done and looking through referenda and figuring out what would work and what would not. And people said, this is very suspicious for various reasons. And so they ended up getting just massively voted down. But I think this is something that shows this resilience of Polkadot, right? That because there's been so much of this previous experience with governance, when there is actual malicious state-based malicious actors, all right, we know enough to actually say no, this is suspicious. We're not going to want to fund them.
I think it's a testimony to Polkadot as a project, but decentralization also and democratization. And I think when you look at Polkadot technically in regards to what it's trying to do as a blockchain project, it's pushing those boundaries. It's innovating. It's leading in many regards, but not just from a technological aspect, also from a kind of socio-political aspect in regards to this new thing forming that we're yet to see how far it goes. I mean, you're going to end up with parties. You kind of have got that a little bit. You're going to end up with all kinds of things. I think it's truly interesting to see where it's going. And what excites me about OpenGov as well is there could be somebody listening to this that has an amazing idea that relates to distributed ledger technology. And they might not be able to get funding. They might not be able to do whatever it is. Whereas they can step into Polkadot OpenGov, and providing they have a genuine idea that is going to be of benefit to Polkadot and its ecosystem and the world more broadly, you can actually go through OpenGov and get funded, and you could be the next person to create Web3 YouTube or whatever it may be. And I think that's extremely exciting. Gav spoke about including tinkerers. And actually, you get that not just from the protocol point of view, but also from the OpenGov point of view. Anybody and everyone can take part, which is amazing.
Yeah, and encouraging tinkerers, encouraging people to do things on the network is really been a focus. We want builders on the network. Actually, this is a bit of a tangent, so I hope you don't mind. But so one thing we actually had recently was a referendum on Kusama to essentially make Kusama more of a tinkerer's playground, a hacker's playground. So we actually, Web3 Foundation, are giving 10 million DOT to the Kusama treasury and to people building on Kusama. So 10 million DOT, it's a pretty significant amount to build various new things on Kusama. We want Kusama to be more of a focus for zero knowledge technology, which and more of a hacker's playground. So for various reasons, Polkadot doesn't use a lot of ZK stuff, but we see that as a really interesting technology and something there's a lot of opportunity to build with. And so what we've done is build this project, this 10 million dot for Kusama. We're moving dot over from the Polkadot network to Kusama. Another cool thing that you can do, right, is having your native assets bridged over, so other assets bridged over so easily. And essentially giving this to people that want to build new cool stuff, especially with advanced cryptography on Kusama.
It's extremely, I'm just excited to see. I've been excited to follow the journey thus far, and I'm excited to see where it's going and how things are evolving and the successes. Some things that, and I think Polkadot and its ecosystem have always been very well at, or done very well at realizing when things haven't quite worked or when they need changing. And I think, if you look at the move away from the sort of slot auction model to where we are today, I mean, that's a real testimony to it. Bill, in the next 12 months, what should people be looking out for?
So the first thing is, of course, Hub and Cloud. So we'll be seeing smart contracts on Polkadot. We're already having hackathons for that. We're already doing a lot of preparatory work for that right now. That should be at the end of the summer, approximately August, September, which is something that's very cool. The other thing, so I'd mentioned, we have this relay chain, this central chain of Polkadot, and the goal for the relay chain has always been to only support the rollups, only support the parachains. And we're actually moving a lot of the features of the relay chain off to one of the parachains, which should make things much, much, much more efficient. So staking, governance, account balances, DOT, will all be handled by another chain, which I also think is very cool, just from a technical perspective, being able to just take capabilities here and moving them to another chain in the ecosystem. So from the end user perspective, should not really change very much. The final thing I would say over the next 12 months to look out for is the beginnings of Jam. So again, this is going to really increase the throughput of Polkadot tremendously by several orders of magnitude, as well as providing some other additional capabilities. And that's really very much in the early days right now, but over the next 12 months, you should start seeing test nets appear, and then really seeing what can happen, what can happen with this technology.
A lot to look forward to. We're going to leave links to where you can find Bill in the description, where you can find OpenGov. It's truly been, it's more than an experiment. It's a real thing at this point, and it's doing very well, and it's got its trials and tribulations. But as me and Bill both believe, Nirvana's not for this world, and there perhaps isn't a perfect governance system, but this is aiming towards that. We're going to leave links to where you can find Bill, OpenGov, Polkadot generally, some of the changes that happen in the description. The last thing for me to do, Bill, is thank you sincerely for coming on. I absolutely love talking with you. I love diving into the Polkadot ecosystem, and I want to thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.